Good afternoon, all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari. So today in this video, we are going to discuss the important articles for 18th of January 2023. So the first article is talking about that the Pakistan's Prime Minister, he moods serious and sincere talks with the Indian Prime Minister. So he says that Pakistan wants peace with India, but what is happening in Kashmir, that should be stopped. And we have had three wars with India. So three wars were in 1947, 1965 and 1999. So here we're talking in the context of Kashmir, and definitely we had a war in 1971 as well, that was also known as the Indo-Bangladesh War. So he says that war, it only brings misery and poverty. So that's why he is asking for serious and sincere discussions with India. And he says that Pakistan had learned its lesson after three wars with India and stressed that now it wanted peace with its neighbor. Then UNSC, it sanctions it's the sanctions committee blacklists the Lashkar's Maki. So he's a terrorist, and he's the fundraiser and key planner of the Pakistan-based terrorist organization that is Lashkar-e-Taiba. And uh, obviously Hafiz Mohammed Saeed is also associated with Lashkar-e-Taiba. So this move has been possible after China, it withdrew its technical hold that it had placed, and Beijing has now argued that the blacklisting, it is in fact a recognition of the Pakistan's record of fighting terrorism. So you can find out about the process, how it is, how the blacklisting is done. Then backing Sri Lanka, so India sends financing assurances to IMF, and we can say that China, Japan, India, and Sri Lanka are India, and they are Sri Lanka's three largest bilateral lenders. So China, Japan, and India. And with India getting on board, so Sri Lanka's chances of swiftly tapping the IMF assistance, now it depend on similar assurances from Japan and China also. And you can find out about what is Paris Club and what is its like function. Then coming to the editorial page, so we know that the government, it has released a scheme that is we can say that it is an updated or a new version of the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana, where the government would be providing free food grains for 1 year, that is during 2023, and that it earlier used to provide under the National Food Security Act, but now for 1 year they are going to provide it at free of cost. So 5 kg per person food grains at free of cost every month. And here we'll be basically looking at what are the flaws and that needs to be addressed in this new scheme. Then we see that the first flaw is that the real design flaw is its lack of the universal coverage. So it is not having universal coverage as of now, specifically, especially the ration cards, they have not been updated since the 2011 census. So this is one thing, and more than 40% of the India's population, it is currently excluded from both the National Food Security Act and the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana. And there are many villages and slums in the most marginalized caste and communities, especially migrants, sex workers, the homeless, and transgender persons. They are often without the ration cards. So they are still they're excluded. And talking about few states where they are providing universal coverage to the people living in a particular state. So that includes Tamil Nadu, Odisha, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, West Bengal. So they have either universalized or they have substantially expanded the coverage with state cards. So basically, the main flaw that is being talking about in this article is regarding universalization of the scheme. And Supreme Court of India is also in 2022 order, it has directed the central government to expand the coverage under the National Food Security Act. And talking about what are the challenges, so basically here you'll be getting to know the key terms of the challenges that are faced under the MG Narega Act. That includes it is undermined by the acute budget cuts, there are delayed payments, wage payments, and thirdly, there are technological hurdles that we can talk, they are in the form of recording the attendance data and all of that. So these are the main we can say three challenges regarding MG Narega, and you should be knowing about these key terms because you need to write less using like you need to write more using less words. So that is there. And In this article, basically, it is regarding the cooling down of inflation. So recently we saw that the wholesale price index, it has fallen to its 22-month low at 4.95% this year. And RBI, it has projected inflation to average around 5.9% in the current quarter from 6.1% in the third quarter, that was in 2022. So that is also one estimates. And however, this cooling down, it is still yet not, we can say that we are in a comfortable situation as of now. So we see that there have been disproportionately influenced by what some economists they have termed an idiosyncratic element, that is the vegetable prices. So some economists they believe that this downfall in the inflation is because of the cooling down of the vegetable prices. So since vegetable prices are there, they're really volatile, so that's why they have huge influence on the inflation index. And this is one factor that they believe is causing cooling down of the inflation rate. So inflation, it has accelerated for the sixth straight month in the largest item of the food basket, that is cereal inflation. So that is still at very high level, that is 13.8%. And wheat prices, they are rising at 22% rate. So that's why we are saying that we are still not yet in a comfortable situation when we talk about inflation. So we need more of price stability when we talk about the cereal inflation or the wheat prices, and they still needs to come down. So an uptick was also seen for pulses, milk, eggs, meat, and fish and spices. So even the non-food items and services, they have shown stubborn price rise trends. So still the prices are rising, and keeping this volatile vegetable prices out, even when we calculate the retail inflation, keeping the vegetable prices out of the calculation, in November we saw that retail inflation was at 7%. It has increased to 7.2% in December. So now we can say that the cooling down is basically because of the vegetable prices. And talking about the core inflation, which does not include the price change of food and energy, so even core inflation, it also inched up, it has increased, and it needs attention. So right now it is at 6%, and it is too early to take the eyes off the inflation problem, so which continues to hurt the rural demand in particular, which is deterring the much awaited private investment plans also. So that is the situation when we talk about inflation. And talking about the fiscal federalism, so here we'll be talking about what reforms can be done. And firstly, we'll be understanding what do we mean by the vertical fiscal imbalance between union and the states. So the union government, it is endowed with more tax powers than the states. So more taxation powers are there with the central government or the union government compared to that with the states, while the states they have been assigned more expenditure responsibilities than the union government. So this, you can say, this is known as the vertical fiscal imbalance between the union and the states, that union have more taxation powers, whereas the expenditure responsibilities are more on the state government. So they should be having more, we can say, fiscal resources, but that is what is known as the vertical fiscal imbalance. So the main responsibility of the Finance Commission is to correct this imbalance, but the task, it still remains unaccomplished. And measuring what are the imbalances and what are the reforms that we'll be discussing further in this article. So empirical measures, basically this article is proposing one formula to calculate what is the amount of the vertical fiscal imbalance for a particular state. So the formula that it is proposing is that 1 minus the ratio of the state's own revenue to the own expenditure. So you will subtract 1 out of the ratio of, basically you will subtract ratio out of 1. So the ratio is going to be the state's own revenue and to its own total expenditure. So if the value turns out to be 0, so that will mean that states they have enough of own revenue to meet their own expenditure needs and requirements, and there is no need of financial transfers from the union. So that is what would we will get out when we calculate using this formula. But if we look at the data for all the states over the period of the last three finance commissions, that is between 2005-6 to 2020-21, so we see that the VFI ratio, it shows an increasing trend. So which means basically when we look at the data for specifically between 2015-16 to 2020-21, so the ratio was 0.53, which means that only 47% of the state's own expenditure was financed by their own revenue in that period. So we can say that rest 53% of the its expenditure responsibilities would have to be met by the fiscal transfers from the union. So that is there, and this is what the data is telling. And there are four major changes that have took place since this period. So we see first change was regarding the divisible taxes of the union government, that expanded from two to all the union taxes, and this enlarged the revenue base to be shared with the states. So that is one positive development. Secondly, we saw that the fiscal responsibility legislation was implemented to constrain the fiscal deficits of the states. Thirdly was the Union Planning Commission was dissolved, which led to the withdrawal of the plan grants that used to be transferred to the states. And fourthly was the introduction of the GST in 2017. So these changes, they have considerably altered the state's revenue structure. So you need to memorize these four major changes that took place. And talking about now the reforms that can be carried out. So firstly, reassigning or reassessing the tax powers between the union and the states. So we need to bring all the commodities, including the petroleum products, under the GST. This is the one reform this who the authors of this article are proposing. So bringing the petroleum under the GST. Secondly, the union government should continue to collect the IGST only to settle the revenue on a destination basis. Thirdly, that under GST Council, the veto power of the union government, that should be removed. And so these are basically the reforms that are being proposed. So basically reassigning the tax powers between the union and the center, that is the main theme. And under it, firstly, bringing the petroleum under GST, then the union government needs to continue to collect the IGST only to settle the revenue on a destination basis. Thirdly, that the veto power of the government, which is assigned to it under the GST Council, that should be removed. And when we talk about even the horizontal fiscal imbalance, so here we see the fiscal transfers to the states to address this vertical fiscal imbalance may not be needed if the entire GST is assigned to the states and the tax base of the GST, namely the consumption, it is not equally distributed among the states. So because the tax revenue, it is not equally distributed between the states, so that leads to unequal tax base with unequal expenditure requirement between the states, and that creates horizontal fiscal imbalance among the states. So I'll repeat that unequal tax base with unequal expenditure requirements of each and every state creates horizontal fiscal imbalance. So you should be clear with the meaning of vertical and the horizontal fiscal imbalance. Then talking about the recent proposal of the migrant, basically providing the remote voting machine. So basically here we'll be looking at that. Basically we have discussed this topic before. So here we'll be just going through the gist of this article. So basically it is saying that that India's new proposal for the migrant voting, where we see that the opposition, they have raised their concerns about the logistical and the administrative challenges to the remote voting proposal. So logistical and the administrative challenges, and the report that is titled is the Indian EVM and the VVPAT system fit for democratic elections. So the report states that the details of the EVM design, prototype, software, and the hardware verification, they are not publicly available for the technical and the independent review. So this is, we can say, one of the reforms that this report is pointing towards, that should be made available so that there is more transparency and accountability. And Election Commission of India has said time and again that EVMs and their systems, they are robust, they are secure and tamper proof. owing to their technical and institutional safeguards which are in place. So ECI claims that the safeguards, such as sealing of the machines with signatures of the polling agents, their first level checks, randomization of the machines, and a series of mock polls before the actual voting, that cannot be circumvented. So let's move ahead. Then the Supreme Court asks, or it says the center that it needs to finish the collection of what are the state's views on identifying the minorities. So center's position in the Supreme Court, it remained uncertain on Tuesday on whether its 1993 notification, which was regarding identifying the Muslims, Christians, Sikh, Buddhist, and Parsis as minority communities, that needed reconsideration in the light of a view by the National Commission for Minorities that the religious and the linguistic minority communities, they ought to be identified state-wise. So National Commission for Minorities says that the religious and the linguistic minorities, they need to be identified state-wise and not nationally. And National Commission for Minorities, it agrees with the definition of minority, not on nationwide basis but statewide basis. So a center has to provide what are the reviews of different states on this issue, and Supreme Court has asked the center to do it on quickly. So now regarding the draft rule regarding the fake news. So the news that is marked false by PIB, that is Press Information Bureau, that needs to be taken down. So this is what the new draft rules are proposing. So the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, it proposed a draft rule that will require the social media platforms to take down the content that has been a fact checked by the PIB a unit as a false news. So every news that will be identified and be termed as false news would have to be taken down by the social media platforms. So obviously false news or fake rumors and fake news that can lead to even, we can say, disturbance of social peace and security. So that is very important, and it needs to be ensured that fake news is not spread, it does not get spread on social media platforms, because we know that with increased number of internet users in India, the even a small piece of news can spread virally within seconds. Then we see that, okay, talking about India and China regarding the population. So in a landmark shift, we are seeing China's population declines in 2022. So India will overtake China as the world's most populous nation. This year, that is in 2023, we are going to overtake China, and India is going to be the world's most populous country. So in this graph also, you can see that this red line is the graph for China. So it was at peak during 1963, when we say that China had the highest crude birth rate among all the BRICS nations in 1963, but it declined rapidly to become the lowest in 2020. So this graph is showing the crude birth rate, that is per 1,000 people. So you can have a look at the same rate for other economies like Brazil. That these are the BRICS nations. So Brazil, you see Russia's, which has been lower than China's birth rate, and India, then you see South Africa and Brazil. So China was at its peak, and it like steeply declined, and then you can see a gradual downfall in the birth rate in China's case. So China's GDP, it rose only 3% in 2022 because of the impact of the COVID-19, and the growth, it has now deaccelerated to the second slowest pace since 1976. So we are seeing that China's economy is slowing down, its population, basically the birth rate is declining, and India is soon going to overtake China in terms of the population. And with the slowdown in China's economy, so it is definitely going to have a negative impact on the global growth and the growth of other economies in particular, which are dependent upon China. Now talking about the fiscal deficit target. So right now for the current financial year, that is the financial year 2023, our fiscal deficit target is 6.4% of the GDP, but it is likely that center may reduce it up till 6% for financial year 2024. So you should be knowing what is the meaning or how do you calculate fiscal deficit. So when the government's total expenditure is more than its total revenue, so basically you will the formula would be total expenditure minus the total revenue. So in total revenue, non-debt creating revenue would be there, and non-debt creating capital receipts plus the total revenue receipts. So that is the formula for fiscal deficit. And now let's move to the Financial Express. So in Financial Express, we've talked about the tax regime that is there, what is the percentage of tax. Then windfall tax has been reduced on crude, diesel, aviation turbine fuel, and the windfall taxes, they are reviewed in sync with the global crude oil prices, and also they are progressive in nature. So since they are progressive, so they definitely help in reducing the income inequality, and they are imposed on, we can say, the companies which are specifically the energy companies that earn huge amounts of profits. So that is the windfall tax. And Ragurajam sir, basically very important economist. So he's been a former RBI governor also. So he says that it is premature to say that India will replace China. So that is because right now India is much smaller economy as of now when we compare it with the Chinese economy. So, but over a period of time, it might be possible that the situation might change, and India, it is recently, we can say, it is became the fifth largest economy in the world. We overtook England, and right now at the World Economic Forum, also the chief economist outlook that is published by the World Economic Forum. So this becomes important for PT. So it saw that majority of the the personalities, they expecting a global recession in 2023. So maximum participants, they believe that 2023 going to be a recessionary year. And Raghurajam sir said that any recovery in the Chinese economy would definitely boost the global growth prospects. So that is there, and that's all. So we'll take up the Mint also. So in Mint, we're going to take up our automobile sector. So here we are doing a comparison. So India is at number 3 in auto market in the charts when we look at globally. So India, it is fast climbing the global charts, which is likely becoming the third largest auto market in the world. And however, that's just based on the overall sales figure. So on the basis of overall sales, we are the third largest auto market, and the per capita vehicle ownership is low for India's population. So this is one fact, and the value of the auto market in India lags behind the other larger markets because the vehicles in India, they are far cheaper when we compare their value with the other large economies where we have the large auto market. So that is because of the higher value that is there. And in this graph also, you can see that vehicle sales in 2022, so China recorded the highest number of sales, then it was followed by US and India. So here you can look at the number of vehicles per million population. So it is the highest in US, then it was around 16,600 in China, it is only 3,334 in India, and 33,000 it is in Japan, 35,000 in Germany. So that is there. So in India, it is one of the lowest when we are basically here talking about the number of vehicles per million population. And then, so looking at the long journey, so different mileages. So here we say that automakers, they often blame the higher taxes for the low car penetration levels in India. So with low income states widening the gap. So here the main reason that has been cited is the high amount of tax that is imposed on automobiles, and which is the reason behind low car penetration levels. And here, this graph or the data that has been represented here is showing the vehicles registered per million population. So per 10 lakh people, what is the number of vehicle registered? So it is, we can say, the highest one is there in Chandigarh. So Chandigarh has 3,37,000. Then it is next, it is followed up by Goa. So in Goa, it is 2,52,000. So we are looking at the vehicles registered per million population. Okay, so highest in Chandigarh, followed by Goa. Then you have Delhi, which is at approximately 2.5 lakh. So that is there. And top 10 states by the number of vehicles. So highest number of vehicles are there in Maharashtra. Then it is followed by Uttar Pradesh. Then we have in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Kerala. So Delhi is far behind. And you can have a look at the companies on the basis of the market share based on the vehicles retail sales for December 2022. So highest is for Maruti Suzuki India. Then you have Hyundai Motor India, Tata Motors, Mahindra and Mahindra, Kia Motors. So all these are there. And so here this graph is showing the year-on-year percentage change in the outstanding credit when we talk about the vehicle loans and the personal loans. So vehicle loans outstanding is surpassed that of the personal loans. That is obviously the reason can be COVID-19 impact and the financial problems that it created. And this graph is showing the year-on-year percentage change in the passenger vehicle sales volume. So here that has been increasing and that is there. So thank you for joining Ansarkari and do not forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button and share this video as much as possible. So see you soon tomorrow.